Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're going to talk about how to varnish an acrylic painting. Now this is actually part 2 in my little series about varnishing, so if you missed the first part, which was all about what a varnish is and why artists varnish paintings, go watch that one first before you watch this one. The very first thing I do for a varnish is I let the painting cure for 24 hours. That means once I finished it, I can't touch it for 24 hours at all. Now this time kind of is influenced by how thick the paint is. If it's thicker, it's going to take longer. Humidity, airflow, and temperature is all going to affect this curing, drying time of the paint. You need it to really be permanent here on the canvas, not wet on the inside of like a ball of paint on the canvas. It needs to be totally dry before you do this. And because most of my paintings, the paint film is very thin on the canvas, that 24 hours is pretty good for me based on where I live and my studio conditions. But when that 24 hours is happening, I can do a couple things to get myself ready for the next step. I can work on mixing up my isolation coat and make sure I have a space ready for varnishing when I get there. There's 6 things you need for an isolation coat. The first is a clear container that has a lid. So I've labeled it ahead of time isolation coat because I want to know what's in this later. In case I forget what it was, I have it labeled right on the jar, isolation coat, so I know that's what's in this jar. And you definitely do want this to be clear with a lid, so make sure you find something that'll work. You're also going to need a Sharpie because it's going to help us measure out what goes in the isolation jar. You'll need something to mix it up, and I just use a plastic spoon. You're going to need a brush to apply the isolation coat, and I really don't have a good brand recommendation. You just want something that has a soft bristle and you want it to be synthetic. And the isolation coat itself is made up of 2 parts. Soft gel gloss, and this is Golden brand, which is what I use. And you also need distilled water, and you can find this in supermarkets over by the bottled water. It doesn't matter what brand, all distilled water is made the same. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just spooning some of the soft gel into the jar. And this stuff is a bit thinner than the regular heavy body paint. It's not too thick, but it's also not pure liquid. So I'm just spooning a little bit into this little glass jar. And I don't want to get too much on the sides. I want to be able to see it here on the side of the jar and kind of measure how tall this is. That's going to help me out when figuring out this ratio. Once I have the soft gel in the jar, I just draw a line right where the soft gel comes to on the side of the glass, just so I can see that's how much soft gel is in the jar. Then I can visually divide this space in half and draw myself another line so I know where half of the soft gel is. Now because of that, I can figure out this ratio. If this is 2 parts soft gel, I need another part of distilled water. So if this is 1 part and this is 1 part, then I need another 1 part of water. So I just kind of visually look at how far apart my 2 lines are, and then I draw myself another line, putting it the same distance as these 2. Then what I can do is fill distilled water up to this line. With the water in there, I'm just going to very carefully mix this up. And the reason I'm doing this and letting it sit for 24 hours while my painting is curing is so that any air bubbles I accidentally mix in can kind of get to the surface of the isolation coat and pop and leave the isolation coat. Any bubbles are basically going to make this cloudy when I appear it to the canvas, and I want it to be completely clear. I don't want it to be cloudy. As you're mixing, it's not going to seem like it's going to come together and become a consistent mixture, but just keep going until it does. Normally, mine are a bit thicker than this is, so I'm going to clean off my spoon and add just a little bit more soft gel. I've thickened up the isolation coat a little bit, and it's still kind of thin, but it's not as thin as it was. So I'm going to put the cap on this and let it sit for at least 24 hours so all of the air bubbles I mixed in by mixing it together can rise to the surface and pop. They're not going to get trapped in this and make it cloudy. Now, a quick tip I have for you is to wipe off the edges where you got isolation coat, because this stuff is like glue, and when it dries, if it's still there, it's going to kind of cement the lid to it, and you don't want that to happen. I'm just applying this with that soft brush, and you just want to do long, even strokes. You don't want to really scrub at this because you're going to add air bubbles into it, but you want to make sure you give a nice, thin, even layer to the entire thing. It will look a little bit cloudy until it dries, and that's okay. You don't want it to be too thick like right here though. You want to make sure you brush that out and make it nice and thin. One of the things I watch for is any hairs getting in the paint. They're really easy to see in lighter colors, and if I see any sort of fuzz or hair, I'll just use the brush and kind of push backwards until I get it on the brush itself, and then I'll wipe it off on a paper towel just so it's not here in the brush and not on the canvas, because it will be stuck there forever. In addition to doing the isolation coat on the face, you should also do it for all 4 edges. What I do is I do 3 edges here on the easel, I hold it upside down in midair and do the bottom, and then I hang it on a wall to dry for another 24 hours. When your isolation coat is fully dry, you need to set up a place to varnish. Ideally, you would have a place that has good ventilation, it doesn't have any moisture or bugs or dirt. It's a place where the painting can lay flat, undisturbed for at least 24 hours. Now, personally, I don't really have a good place for that, so I set up 2 different spaces. I set up a place outside with good ventilation where I can varnish, and then I move the painting indoors where it can dry undisturbed, where I don't have to worry about anything touching it. My varnishing area is outside because I need a lot of ventilation. Varnish has a lot of fumes, so I always do that outside. Now I take a giant cardboard box, and I like the box I have. I got it from IKEA because it has good sidewalls that I can kind of use to buffer the wind as I'm varnishing. It's like a nice kind of little protective shell around the painting, and I do this on my patio, so it has a roof and there's like 3 walls to kind of protect me further from wind and rain. The drying area is indoors because then I don't have to worry about rain or bugs or someone walking away with my canvas, and that's just here in the studio. I've put 2 nails on the wall so I can balance it evenly, and that way once I set it on the wall, I don't have to worry about it sticking to the easel here as it's drying. It's on the wall, and the only place where it's touching anything is on the back of the canvas where there is no varnish. Like I said, ideally you would want your varnish to dry flat, but I don't have that, so I kind of have to make do with what I have. For the actual painting, you're going to need some varnish. I like the spray can kind because I don't have to mix up a ratio of the varnish. It's already here in the can. I can get it in any finish that I want. I like to use gloss because I think it saturates the colors a little bit and it gives kind of a nice sheen to the painting. Now if you don't like gloss, they also make it in satin, semi-gloss, and matte, but I think the gloss is a little bit easier to use, which I'll talk about when I talk about mixing up the can. You're also going to need a tweezers that you use only for varnishing, so these are my varnishing tweezers. I also use a face mask when I'm varnishing, and this one is for spray painting, just to protect me from any of the aerosol. So you have your varnishing location set up, you have your tweezers, your mask, and your varnish. You're all ready to go. The first thing you do is shake the can for 2 full minutes, and I always set a timer when I do this. This is especially important if you're using something other than gloss. The mattifying agents in the other varnish finishes need to really be mixed in, or your varnish won't be a consistent sheen after you varnish. My varnish is all shook up, so I'm going to put on my mask and begin spraying. I'm going back and forth across the entire canvas in even motions and straight lines. Now when I do this, I'm going all the way off the side of the canvas onto the cardboard, moving down and then doing the next row. I'm doing this real steady, real even. I'm not trying to move too fast, not moving too slow, not stopping at all. If I get too close or if I stop, the varnish is going to pool up and then run down the canvas, and you'll have these runs of varnish on top of your canvas. And those are really hard to fix. So try to make sure you're moving evenly and not stopping. This is where the varnishing tweezers come in. Once you've finished that first pass of varnish, you need to look really closely at your canvas and see if there's any hairs or bugs or anything that shouldn't be there in the varnish. If you're really quick and your varnish is still wet, you can actually pull it out of the varnish quickly with the tweezers. There's nothing in this layer of varnish, so I'm going to move it inside to my drying location for 20 minutes. Once it's been drying for 20 minutes, I'm going to bring it outside again, turn the painting 90 degrees, and give it a second coat of varnish. When you're done with your varnishing can, you should flip it upside down and spray it upside down for a couple seconds to empty out the nozzle. If you look at the varnish coming out, it's going to change and just become some air. That keeps that nozzle clear so that it doesn't get clogged up with varnish. And again, I'm going to quickly check over the second layer, just like I did the first layer. When I'm done outside, I pick up the painting very carefully, trying not to touch the top because there was varnish there, so I kind of pick it up by the stretcher bar on the back, and then I also touch it on the bottom where the varnish didn't get on this layer. So I move it like this very carefully inside to my drying area and hang it on the wall. Once it's safely on the wall in the studio, I close the doors and leave it alone for at least 24 hours. This is for two reasons. The first is when I'm opening and closing the door, I'm stirring up dust and whatever else, and I don't want that stuck in my varnish. The second reason is it's still pretty fumy, so I've made sure there's nothing I need to do in the studio for that 24 hours while the painting is doing its final curing. After that 24 hours, you should be able to handle the canvas again, but if you're going to be shipping it, I would give it a couple extra days to be totally sure it's cured. And that's how I varnish acrylic paintings. I hope this video gave you the confidence you need to varnish your own, and I know it's a little bit intimidating, but it's not too bad with some practice. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you stay tuned for more MalMakes videos.